In recent years, there have been accusations that the judiciary is being politicized. Some judges have been accused of being biased against certain political personalities. Case in point, the decades-long and still ongoing cases against the former president, Jacob Zuma. He's often said he's being politically targeted. Are there any basis to such criticisms? I'm joined now by retired Constitutional Court Justice Zak Yacoob to weigh in on the current state of the judiciary. Judge Yacoob, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Is our judiciary politicized?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is very good to be here. The judiciary is not politicized in the way that it has become biased in favor of particular people, but the judiciary is obliged in the nature of things to deal with political disputes, where constitutional matters are involved in political disputes. So where there are political disputes in connection with whether conduct is lawful or not lawful, then the courts are obliged to deal with them, because politicians can't decide whether their conduct is lawful. Politicians can't decide whether their conduct is consistent with the Constitution. And therefore, even if it is political conduct, if the lawfulness or otherwise of the conduct is in issue, whether the conduct is political or not, the court has to deal with them. And obviously, if the court deals with a political dispute where it is entitled to do so, no loser is happy about a court's decision. That is so in every case. I have never seen any person who loses a case not complaining about the fact that they lost it. They continue to think that they are right despite the fact that they've lost the case. This happens in civil disputes, delictual disputes, ejectment disputes, the whole lot. And politicians are human beings. They are no different. They're going to be unhappy with decisions if they are against them. And the courts are in that case in an invidious position. Because if they find on the one side, the other side will say you're biased in favor of that side. And if they find for the other side, of course, the allegation is reversed. And therefore, there is actually no peace for the courts at all. Because whatever they do, loud-voiced politicians will complain. But that is an occupational hazard of being a judge and being a court. You have to do the difficult thing. Yes.
It's an occupational hazard, as you say, but similarly,
yes.
Similarly, judges are humans, like politicians, as you say, are human beings.
Yes.
Are there any cases recently where some people could have a case maybe of perceiving the judges to be biased?
Well, if there is a perception that the judge has been biased, then the thing must be raised during argument. Once the judgment is given, if the judgment itself creates the impression that it is biased, the right way to do it is to make an application to a court to say, we say that the judgment is biased. But I have noticed that all these claims, in my view, have no real basis. I have not seen a reasonable perception that there has been a bias anywhere. The perception has not been reasonable. The perception has been knee-jerk, and it has been the result of having failed in the case. And I'd like you to find one person in the world who's lost a case in the highest court in the land who will say, yes, the court was right.
There was a lot of hullabaloo in January when Minister Lindiwe Sisulu penned an opinion accusing black judges of being colonized, for example, and yes, that they are mentally colonized and then they're biased. I mean, a lot was said about that. When we're looking at the state yes, of the judiciary today, could there be some justification of that or not at all, in your view?
No, there's no justification for judges being colonized. But there is a problem because judges are reflective of society, generally speaking. And I think what is true is that, like the rest of society, there are many judges who are more conservative. They're not judges who are colonized in the sense of being too liberal. Because remember that the colonial era means that you don't fight against government. In the Western states, England, the government is hardly ever in court losing a case. Our constitution is an exception to the Western standard. It specifically says that governmental action and political action is susceptible to court proceedings. That is not a Western idea. That is an essentially South African idea of accountability. And that is not Western. That is not colonization. That is our way of looking at justice. That is our way of saying that government is accountable to the people, and it is the courts who give judgments in order to ensure that the government remains accountable.
Is our way of ensuring that the executive remains accountable, politicians remain accountable, a sustainable model going forward? I mean, we've seen judges standing their ground and being praised, but they've come under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so there may be another way of preventing politicians from going to court too often. That's part of the problem. The problem is judges have to look at the case, and I don't think anyone else can decide these questions except courts, right? You could constitute another independent body appointed by the Judicial Services Commission of qualified people to determine, it would maybe called a political adjudication center. But of course, if courts can be accused of bias, the political adjudication centers will be accused of bias. But there is one way in which the Constitution can be changed, I think, to let this problem become less acute. You see, we have local, provincial, and national government in our country. And there is a provision in our Constitution which says that where there is a dispute between these governmental structures, then they must try amongst themselves to resolve the dispute. They must say what they've done to resolve the dispute, and they must go to court only if it is a last resort. That happens to governmental people. And I was just wondering the other day, and we haven't thought about it too carefully, it hasn't been fully debated, it's just an idea to throw out there. It might be an idea to amend the Constitution to say that if there is a political dispute of any kind, and you define political dispute very carefully, then you say that the parties must, before they go to court, demonstrate that they have made every effort to settle the dispute amongst themselves, and that they have no choice but to come to court, and they must come to court as a last resort. That might be an interesting way, because one of the problems is that while the politicians do two things which are contradictory. On the one hand, they run to courts too easily, all of them, instead of trying to settle the cases, and then they moan when the courts decide against them. But they run to courts anyway to start with. So if they don't want the court to interfere, they must try very, very hard to settle the disputes amongst themselves. That may be an answer, but again, it's a matter which needs to be very carefully debated.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea that try and settle your disputes, political disputes amongst yourselves first. Don't run to court. Now, currently we're seeing all
kinds of... And if you run to court...
yes. Yeah, you must accept the decision of the court. You must accept the decision of the court. Yeah. No, but currently we have even party political issues ending up in court, not just national government or executive issues. But Judge, I mean, when you look at the
even party political issues, political parties, even like the ANC, must demonstrate that they have tried amongst themselves to settle the dispute. They must show what they've tried to do to settle the dispute. The settlement has not been possible, and they are coming to court as a last resort. Because there is no better place to settle a dispute, a political dispute of a political party, than within a political party itself.
Yeah, I mean, all political parties. Sorry, Judge, to come in there. All political parties have got their statutes, or they've got their respective constitutions and all of that can guide them. You make a very interesting point. I would like to explore this with other constitutional law experts. But while I have you, the question that we are seized with here this afternoon as well on eNCA is our judiciary biased? I mean, how would you answer that in a nutshell? First, and very briefly.
Our judiciary is not biased as a rule at all. I have read many judgments of this court, and I have not yet come across any obvious bias. The courts have been very, very careful, generally speaking.
Okay. What about resources?
There may be the exceptional judge.
Sorry, the exception?
Resources are a problem. Resources are a problem. There may be individual judges who are, okay? And I don't know them. I haven't come across them. So I can't say that every judge is perfect. What I can say from the judgments I have read, that I have not found, reading judgments, a general worry of bias at all.
Okay. Now, coming to resources, during the recent interviews for the Chief Justice role, I mean, the likes of people who are being interviewed there and the question that were being asked, and including in other platforms, the current Chief Justice Raymond Zondo pointing to resources. I mean, for example, we live in a digitized world. Judges and magistrates, people are really working under tough conditions. The tools of the trade for the judiciary are not adequate at this stage. That must be affecting badly their work.
Completely. And my problem is that there is that direct relationship between the amount of corruption and the stealing going on and the absence of resources. If the politicians stop stealing, there will be a great deal of money and they will be able to have resources. You see, corruption is like a treason in our country. And when one says so many billion were stolen, you must bear that in mind, because services suffer. Housing suffers, education suffers, health services suffer, the courts suffer, and corruption has had a serious impact on the courts. And unless we cure that corruption, we're going to have this problem forever.
Should we treat corruption as a treasonable offense in this country, legally?
I would suggest it should be.
Now,
particularly since it has reached the stage in which it has,
Yeah. Now, there was a report I saw recently comparing South African judiciary, which you say you believe is not generally biased, but its health and its integrity compared to other neighboring countries in Southern Africa. South Africa is like a shining example. What needs to be done to protect the standing of the South African judiciary going forward as a bastion of our constitutional democracy?
I think that what needs to be done is to develop a sense of discipline amongst politicians. Whether opportunistic politicians can be disciplined, I suppose, is a very interesting political and philosophical question. But I believe in the changeability of human nature for the better. And I hope, I mean, one can't expect politicians to become ethical or anything, because opportunistic politics and ethics are two different things. And any politician who claims to be ethical is by and large not quite being honest with himself. But one can expect, I would suggest, a measure of discipline which gets them to understand that the judiciary is there also to safeguard them. And to attack the judiciary only because they disagree with your point of view is, in the short term, may be helpful. In the long term, it will be damaging to them as well. Because the next time, the judge will give a decision for them, and the other side will criticize it. And they must bear that in mind, that it can happen both ways. So I must stop it if I were a politician, because I don't want the others to do it. The others must stop it because they don't want me to do it. Simply do unto others as you would do to yourself. And if politicians learn that, and if they begin to learn that if today the judgment is against you that you're complaining about, tomorrow the judgment will be for you, and the other side will complain about that judgment, and you're going to suffer.
Okay. You've said in your view our judiciary currently is not overall biased. You haven't picked up any kind of bias in many of the judgments that you've read. There might be one or two individual judges who might not be perfect, just to paraphrase your words. But you've said the resources are tough. The resources are not there and they're causing a problem. And you are pointing out about these voices of politicians who criticize the judiciary, that they need to begin to think before they speak or not speak at all about it. How would you then overall assess the health, the status, the state of the South African judiciary today?
I think that overall, the South African judiciary is as good as it can be. I mean, one can say that there are problems, but I think that will be pinpricking in a way, because no system is perfect. And our judicial system is not perfect. Humanity is not perfect. It has some weaknesses. There are levels of efficiency problems. I would imagine that there are some judges who don't work as hard as they do. But you know, if you have 240 judges in the country, and 10 or 15 or 20 of them don't do their work properly, and I'm sure that amongst interviewers, you know interviewers who don't do their work properly. Among producers, you know some producers who don't do their work properly. It is in the nature of things that 10 or 15% or 20% of every profession, within reason, don't do their work as well as they should. And yet they are not so bad that you can throw them out. They're kind of mediocre. There are people like that. And I don't want to embarrass anybody to say who is what, you know. It's not for me to assess them. But that, I must say, is a fact of life, is a fact of life in every profession. You get some 10 or 20% of doctors who won't be as good as they should be, lawyers who won't be as good as they should be, accountants who won't be as good as they should be, and I don't think that judges are any different.
But that fact you've just mentioned, in your view currently, has it affected the quality of the justice system, the quality of the South African justice system?
No, not generally. I think that to the extent that that problem is there, it is completely within reasonable bounds.
Okay. If Chief Justice Raymond Zondo called you after this interview and said, what should I focus on as I come in now to make sure we remain on the right track as a judiciary, delivering quality justice to South African citizens, ensuring no bias, and trying to make sure we get the resources right and not be pressured or give in to pressure from politicians, what advice would you give him, Judge?
Oh, no, that is not a matter for the public to know.
I was trying my luck there. Thank you very much. That's
No.
would you? Thank you very much. That's retired Constitutional Court Justice Zak Yacoob. Thank you for your time here on today on eNCA, just giving us some reflection as we are focusing here on the state of the criminal justice system here in South Africa.